Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. How
Absolutely.
are you? How's it going?
It's going pretty as well as it can be, all things considered with the world right now. I know Corona has been hard on many people's mental health, myself included at times, and also I'm based in San Francisco where we have a lot of fires all around us right now, and that's impacting air quality, which also impacts mental health. But with those things in mind, I am doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's definitely been a crazy time. How have it been throughout the pandemic? Like, how have you been holding up?
I think something I have found true I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term Corona coaster, but kind of the
No, I'm not.
down of quarantine. Certainly that term resonates for me. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. Something I know through our work at Trans Lifeline is it's a difficult time for everyone. We've really noticed that every issue that trans people face has really been exacerbated during this time, whether that's social isolation, difficulty accessing medical care, intimate partner violence. There are so many things. And, there's been a little bit of that I've encountered myself in terms of needing to have a surgery rescheduled that had been slated for March. But overall, I'm doing well when I'm doing well and getting through it when things are difficult.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I just realized I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself, so we know who we're talking to. I am Mercedes Kilmer, and I'm an actress and astrologer, and I'm in Los Angeles. And take it
And
away.
I am Bri Barnett. I am the Director of Development and Interim Director of Communications here at Trans Lifeline, where we are the largest direct service provider to trans people in North America. And we have a hotline that is for peer support, for crisis support, and we also have a microgrants program that gives trans people money to legally change their name and gender. And overall, we view our mission as really just connecting trans people to the support and resources they need to survive and thrive.
Beautiful. So, yeah, what motivated you to get involved with the organization and I guess trans advocacy in general? And how did you find yourself in your position you are today?
Yeah, so I got involved in trans advocacy pretty soon after I came out. I had this experience of I was hypothetically at a job that should have been supportive. It was a very liberal nonprofit. And yet I found myself out of a job within a few months of coming out. And really, that direct experience of discrimination caused me to really turn to the community. And thankfully, there was this big trans support graph in the Bay Area and to me, and I climbed on board through volunteering at another amazing organization called the Transgender Law Center. And from there, I've had a career where I worked for a local LGBT center, and then I was working nationally on the issue of paid family leave. And then I really got involved with Trans Lifeline because in late 2018, the Trump administration put out this memo where they wanted to define transgender out of existence, which basically just meant changing laws and executive guidelines to make it so legally being trans doesn't exist. And seeing that, I really realized that while I was really happy working on a national issue that was really close to my heart, which is paid family leave, ultimately, I felt like the skills I had would be best utilized within the trans movement. And so I've been in this position for a bit over a year and a half now.
So cool. And within the organization, like, how have you seen it change since you've been involved, and what do you see as the future of the organization? Like, what things do you want to kind of sharpen, or where do you see the organization being more effective in the future?
Yeah, I've seen so much change here. You know, we're in our 5th anniversary year, and I think the first 3 years we were really just kind of seeing if this thing would work. People were mostly volunteer labor. It was a real labor of love. And there were also, of course, you know, there can be some difficulties, right, with founders when they become very attached to the organization. And so few years, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was saying that's a good way to phrase it. I like.
Absolutely. And, you know, we aren't unique like that. I think these are larger issues, but we had a leadership transition a few years ago, a bit over 2.5 years ago now. And since that time, the organization has just professionalized so much. We've really expanded as well. We're now a bit over a $2 million organization, and we just answered our 100,000th call. That's a surprising tongue twister in there. The hotline. And so, you know, we've really just the scope and scale we're able to operate on has increased so much. And in the past year, I'd say we also have been much better about living our values of intersectionality, although of course there is still work to do. We've done that by launching the first Spanish language hotline for trans people in the US and Canada. That was launched just in July. And this fall, we're going to be adding some specialized expertise to our line to help better answer callers who are facing domestic and intimate partner violence as well. So I think now we're really going into specific issue areas and providing more comprehensive care to our community.
So cool. But, you know, so how can people, I want to know, like, what, besides just monetary donations, like, what do you think is the best way? Like, what kind of work can somebody put in to help the cause, and how can people contribute, like, to your organization and, like, just bigger issue of trans advocacy in general?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways to get involved. First of all of our operators are trans. So, you know, if you are trans and you're watching this and you're thinking about maybe getting involved, go to translifeline.org and you can perhaps look into volunteer opportunities. We're very volunteer-led and run still, even as we have professionalized. And I think we always will be. There's something really powerful in people choosing to give back to their community after they've stabilized their lives a little bit. Other than monetary donations for cis people, you know, we're also always looking for people with specialized expertise, I'd say, especially around areas like communications, design. That if you want to do some more specialized volunteering, you can reach out to me at Bri, just BRI, at translifeline.org, and I'd welcome your email. Of course, it's also really important to be involved not only with Trans Lifeline. I think participating in broader social movements is incredibly important for trans liberation. And ultimately, we view trans mental health as being driven by and connected to the material conditions of our lives. So when you attend a protest to, for example, defund the police, you are contributing to trans liberation because trans people are disproportionately targeted by police violence, especially Black and brown trans women who sometimes participate in higher rates in types of work like sex work that are currently criminalized. So, sex worker rights are trans rights. Getting involved in that movement is contributing to trans liberation. Getting involved in economic inequality work, addressing that, getting involved in making healthcare universal is fundamentally a trans liberation movement. So really, there are so many ways to get involved. And when you do that, you're really helping create the conditions that hopefully one day will make it so an organization like Trans Lifeline doesn't have to exist.
That's beautifully said. What do you think? Is like, I feel it's so important to have any sort of advocacy organization be ran by the people that it's advocating for. Would you talk a little bit about why that's so important?
Yeah, I think it's really vital that we are trans-led and trans-staffed, especially, our leadership is that of a disabled trans woman of color, Reverend Elena Rose Vera. And it's essential because we're going to notice issues that other people aren't. For example, Trans Lifeline is one of the very few hotlines, and to our knowledge, the only national hotline where we have a policy against non-consensual active rescue. So that means we don't call the police on our callers. And we have that policy because we're staffed by trans people, we're led by trans people. And so we have the intimate knowledge of what it's like to have active rescue, have the police called on you, and to have that potentially result in an involuntary psychiatric hold in a misgendered facility. And so because we're trans-led, we would never do that, and we haven't done that since day one. And those types of insights on how to better serve your community are what comes from intersectional leadership and being led by the impacted groups. And I think it's really core and central to everything we do and everything we're trying to do. And so I think that it's just, when it's in your DNA, you don't have to worry about whether or not you're actively serving the community or perhaps unintentionally causing harm. Of course, we still consider ways we can improve. We aren't perfect, but I think it makes that work a lot easier.
Totally. I absolutely. Do you think, since May, June, the George Floyd protests have, do you think, like you were saying about the intersectionality of different social movements and how trans liberation is kind of, I think, the most fundamental, area, I think trans liberation engages with all of these many different areas of social liberation. Like you were saying, have you noticed that there's been an increase in support for your organization since the George Floyd protests began?
I think there have been broader supports, especially for Black-led trans organizations in response to the George Floyd protests. I've seen the Okra Project, who's fantastic, and I know y'all supported in that. And I think that's appropriate. We currently aren't background-led, although that's something we certainly wish to become in the future. And so our surges of support have tended to come more around things like, there was this week from June 8th to the 15th or so, where J.K. Rowling was being really public about bashing trans people. And then at the end of the week, the Trump administration actually rolled back healthcare protections for trans people. And we saw a big surge in support there. But during the peak of the George Floyd protests, we also were fundraising for other causes, because we really think that, when it comes to responding specifically to police violence, Black trans-led and especially Black trans woman-led organizations are going to be the most impactful. I'd also like to take this moment to note that it's so important that these movements are intersectional. We're so happy there's been such a transformative moment around the death of George Floyd. And at the same time, we can't help but notice that Tony McDade, who was killed a few days after George, a Black trans man in Florida, hasn't received the same attention. And I think that's just room for our movements to improve and to remember that we must always be intersectional in our analysis.
Yeah, I agree. Who are some people that you find inspiring that are also, leaders within trans liberation movement, past and present, who, I don't know, who do you look up to, in terms of your work?
Yeah, I think I, like many people, am really inspired by the legacies of Marsha P. Johnson, who has her birthday this week, or had it just a few days ago on Monday. And Sylvia Rivera, who founded, mutual aid networks before they were even being called mutual aid networks, of making sure trans people living on the street were housed and had care, and that they were also a part of those communities and were also fierce in their advocacy around the early days of the gay liberation movement, where trans people were often shut out as being potential threats to making us, the gay liberation movement, unpalatable to cis-het society. And I think there's something really powerful there to remember about the ways in which our own movements can police and restrict our own vision and lenses of possibility. So I think a lot about them when I think about the importance of dreaming big. Miss Major is also an incredibly powerful trans leader who is thankfully still with us, and in her age, left the Bay Area to go to Little Rock to do the work in the South because she saw that is where it was most needed. So massively inspired by Miss Major. I think also there are the nonprofit world that I look up to. I think shows at the ACLU recently helped win the Supreme Court case that made employment discrimination against trans people illegal. And Chase I really admire because he's so eloquent in talking about the limits of nonprofit structures and how nonprofits can support social movements, but also are themselves not social movements, which I think is such a valuable perspective when we're thinking about our work, how we can be in partnership to and assisting social change while also recognizing the limits of formalized structures like nonprofits.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I feel like that's such a fruitful discussion that always leads back to the importance of mutual aid and just actual person to person change. But what does allyship mean? How can people support movements that don't necessarily directly impact them?
Yeah, I think it is an action. It's a verb. It's constantly showing up and then thinking about how you show up as well. So it's going to the protest, but doing more than that, perhaps not only trying to educate yourself, but sparking conversations with people in your community. And it's also getting organized. It's about plugging into local collectives or organizations that support those marches. So then when there are moments of uprising, you don't necessarily have to just turn out into the street, although that's important, but you can actually be a part of shaping what that resistance looks like. So I think and being an ally is it's an action. And I also sometimes think of it, I'm a spiritual person. I'm Jewish. I also have a Buddhist meditation practice. And sometimes I think a little bit of allyship as like a form of prayer too. It's a way of trying to speak the world you want to live in into existence. And so whether that's through small individual acts, such as a dedication of merit, of a meditation practice, whether that's reading books on the issue, whether that's perhaps changing or who you trying to support Black businesses. There are just so many ways to practice it, and it's an active part of wishing that world we want to live in into existence.
That's beautiful. That beautifully leads into my last question, which is, how do you find fulfillment in your work, and what aspects of it? Yeah, what do you connect to, like, that are aspects of inspiration and fulfillment in the work that you do?
That's such a good question. Thank you for that. For me, what inspires me is really the resiliency and the strength of trans communities and our resistance movements that have been here through really awful times. And also sometimes we get these little victories and we get to celebrate those as well. But just thinking about all the sweet networks of care and community that really made my life possible. All the trans people who fought so hard for so many years to create a space where I could learn what it is to be trans, and then I can come out and actually have a career advocating for my community. I'm incredibly fortunate in that way, and it's humbling and grounding. And it also inspires me to really think about like how we can support people better. I think about my own coming out story and how important those first few connections with another trans person are, how I didn't know any trans people growing up. And now for many of our callers, the first time they ever speak to another trans person is when they make a call to us, and just how completely revolutionary that can be for someone to actually hear someone just living their life and know that it's like a normal option. It's a normal part of the human experience. Yeah, so I think that's where I find my general inspiration and also my specific inspiration with my work at Trans Lifeline.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure talking to you and hearing about the work that you do. I'm so happy to get to share this interview with people.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And for those watching along at home, thank you so much for your support. And if you do decide to make a donation, I just want you to know that it really is influential. The majority of our funding comes from gifts under $1,000. The vast majority of our funding, 85%, comes from individuals. And even a gift of just $25 helps connect one person to the hotline. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for everyone at home for following along.
Yay!